There is a saying on Earth, and believe me, I have cataloged 17,412 Earth sayings at this point, because apparently humans cannot simply experience a moment without packaging it into a proverb. There is a saying that goes, "Do not judge a book by its cover." We judged the book so hard. My name is Vorath Sen, Senior Cultural Attaché of the Galactic Confluence, and I am filing this report with full transparency, complete honesty, and what my therapist, yes, I have a therapist now, this assignment gave me one, calls radical accountability. What follows is an accurate account of first contact negotiations aboard the Confluence diplomatic vessel Undying Patience, and if certain members of the Council find this report embarrassing, then perhaps those members should have listened to me when I said, and I quote, "This is a bad idea." They did not listen. So here we are. The human representative arrived at Docking Bay 7 on the 32nd cycle of the hegemony calendar, a Tuesday, by human reckoning, which apparently carries a specific cultural weight of its own that even now I struggle to translate. She came alone. This was the first sign we missed. The Confluence had sent 14 delegates, 2 legal teams, a cultural mediation unit, and a species of empathic invertebrates we use specifically to detect deception. The human sent one person. Her name was Priya Voss. She was small, even by human standards. I had studied enough human biometrics to know this. She had dark eyes, close-cropped hair, and she was smiling when the docking ramp extended. Not a nervous smile, not a performative diplomatic smile, the kind humans deploy as a kind of social armor. This was something quieter, something that stayed in the corners of her mouth like a private joke she was deciding whether or not to share. She was wearing civilian clothing. Not a uniform, not formal diplomatic attire. Civilian clothing, with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. My colleague Dethrick Voss, species liaison, 3rd tier, extremely confident in his assessments, leaned toward me and said, in our language, that the humans had clearly not taken this meeting seriously. He said it with the kind of authority that comes from having never been wrong enough times to develop genuine humility. I noted his opinion. I did not agree with it. Something about the way Priya Voss walked through our docking bay, unhurried, eyes moving, cataloging everything with the quiet efficiency of something that had learned long ago to always know where the exits were, made me uneasy in a way I could not immediately name. She greeted us in standard Galactic. Her accent was good, better than good. She had clearly practiced. Dethrick Voss introduced himself first, as was protocol. He gave his full title, his lineage affiliation, his academic credentials, and his service record. It took approximately 4 minutes. Priya Voss listened. She nodded at appropriate intervals. She did not look bored, which I found impressive, because I was bored, and I had heard this speech 11 times. When Dethrick Voss finished, she said, "Priya Voss, I work for the people of Earth," and then she smiled again. That same small, private smile. Dethrick Voss found this charming in the way one finds a child's drawing charming. Technically impressive for its context, not to be taken seriously. He categorized her immediately. I could see it in his posture, the slight relaxation of his secondary muscles that indicated he had made a decision about something and was comfortable with it. Humans do this too, I would later learn. They call it sizing someone up. The irony is that Priya Voss was doing the exact same thing to him, and only one of them was reaching an accurate conclusion. We moved to the negotiation suite. I want to describe this room, because the room matters. The Undying Patience's negotiation suite was designed specifically to create psychological advantage. The ceiling was high, uncomfortably high for most species, creating a sensation of smallness. The lighting was calibrated to the Confluence standard spectrum, which is subtly different from what humans find comfortable, skewing toward frequencies that induce mild fatigue in mammalian nervous systems. The chairs on our side of the table were elevated by precisely 4 centimeters. Small details. The kind of thing a diplomat notices if they have been briefed. The kind of thing that gets missed if you have not. Priya Voss sat down, looked at the ceiling, looked at the lighting panels, looked at the chair height. This took approximately 6 seconds, and then she reached into the bag she had carried aboard and produced a small device. She placed it on the table. It projected a warm, amber light, the kind of light humans use in spaces where they feel at ease. "Portable lamp," she said pleasantly. "I hope that's all right. I think more clearly with good lighting." She smiled at us. That same smile. Dethrick Voss said it was perfectly fine. I wrote in my personal log, she noticed everything. The negotiations began. The Confluence's position was straightforward. We had been straightforward about it in the preliminary documents, in the 3 cycles of pre-meeting correspondence, and in the formal agenda that had been transmitted to Earth's diplomatic office 14 days prior. We wanted transit rights through the Sol system's outer orbital lanes. In exchange, we were offering Confluence Associate membership, technology sharing accords, and trade route access. It was, by any reasonable measure, an extraordinarily generous offer. Several member species had waited decades for comparable terms. Priya Voss reviewed the documents we provided. She did this thoroughly, and in silence, and the silence was the kind that fills a room up to the rafters and sits there, heavy. Dethrick Voss began talking into the silence after about 3 minutes, because he was the kind of person who experienced silence as a problem to be solved. He elaborated on the offer's benefits. He emphasized the historical significance of the moment. He said the word opportunity 4 times. Priya Voss continued reading. When she finished, she set the documents down and folded her hands on the table. And she said, "Walk me through the exclusivity clause." Dethrick Voss blinked. The exclusivity clause is standard Confluence language for associate membership. It simply means that Earth would route certain categories of trade and diplomatic correspondence through Confluence infrastructure, rather than negotiating independently with non-Confluence species, Priya Voss said. Her voice was pleasant. Her smile had not changed. So Earth would be agreeing not to independently negotiate with the Karath hegemony, the Veld coalition, or the Outer Drift collectives without Confluence approval. There was a pause, a short one, but noticeable. That is a simplified interpretation, Dethrick Voss said. Is it an inaccurate one? She asked. Another pause, longer this time. The clause is, Dethrick Voss said, designed to ensure coherent and stable. Said Priya Voss. It was a small sound, polite. The verbal equivalent of a door being gently but firmly closed. She made a note on the document. Then she looked up and said, "What's your timeline for the Veld Transit Corridor vote?" The room went quiet in a different way than before, because that question, that specific question, was not something that had been in any public document. It was not something that had been transmitted to Earth. It was internal Confluence business, sensitive internal Confluence business, regarding a vote that was scheduled for the following cycle and which had significant implications for exactly the kind of deal currently on the table. Dethrick Voss said, carefully, that he was not sure what she was referring to. Priya Voss smiled. The smile was a little wider now. "Of course," she said pleasantly. "Never mind, let's continue." She knew. She absolutely knew. And she had wanted us to know she knew. I sat there and thought about the entrance she had made alone, unhurried, in civilian clothes, smiling, and I started to understand that what I had read as casual was not casual. What I had read as unguarded was not unguarded. Priya Voss had walked into this room with 17 kinds of leverage, and she had carried them the way a person carries a concealed blade, close, quiet, completely invisible, until the precise moment she chose to show it. We broke for a meal interval. It was during the meal interval that things became educational. Priya Voss had brought her own food. She mentioned a dietary consideration, nothing unusual. Many species bring provisions for diplomatic meetings. What she had brought was, by her people's standards, apparently a fairly ordinary meal. By our understanding of human diet, it was not. Let me explain. In our preparation for this meeting, we had researched human cuisine. We had reviewed standard human dietary patterns. We were aware that humans were omnivores. We had considered this unremarkable. Most sapient species in the confluence are omnivores of some kind. It is a common evolutionary strategy. What our research had somehow glossed over, and I intend to have a very pointed conversation with our xenobiology department about this, was the specific relationship that humans have with certain of their food animals. Specifically the animals they had, over centuries, domesticated. Specifically the process of domestication itself, which is, when you actually look at it clearly and without the comfortable filter of academic abstraction, one of the most startling things a species has ever done. Dethrick Voss had brought a xenobiologist along to the meal interval. Her name was Fess Ular, and she had spent 12 years studying Earth, and she said something that stuck with me. She said she had always focused on the large predators, the apex fauna, the evolutionary threats, the things that should by all logic have kept humans small and frightened and contained. She had studied the felids of Earth's grasslands, the large coastal hunters, the pack predators that occupied every major continent. She had concluded, as most xenobiologists conclude, that humans had survived and thrived by being clever and social, by using tools. She had not, Fessular admitted quietly over her meal, fully processed what it meant that humans had also tamed those predators, not driven them off, not exterminated them, tamed them, taken the things that should have been their doom, and turned them into companions, into symbols, into art. Priya Voss, at this point, had set down her meal container and was looking at her own forearm, and the thing I had noted when she arrived, the rolled sleeve, the glimpse of something beneath, came into sudden focus, because running from her wrist to just below her elbow, rendered in extraordinary detail by a needle and ink, and what I can only assume was a significant amount of deliberate chosen pain, was a tiger, not a cartoon, not an abstraction. A tiger, mid-stride, muscles rendered in black and amber, mouth slightly open, eyes forward, and certain and absolutely without apology. Priya Voss noticed me looking. She held out her arm, offering a better view. Bengal tiger, she said. Panthera tigris. They're endangered now, we almost lost them. About 3,000 left in the wild. She said this with something in her voice that was not quite grief, and not quite pride, and was perhaps both, braided together the way humans seem to braid their contradictions. My grandmother used to tell me their stories. I got this when I was 19. Dethrick Voss made a polite noise of interest. He was still, I could tell, categorizing this as a charming cultural affectation. Decorative. Minor. Fess Uller was looking at the tattoo with an expression I had not seen on her face before. She was looking at it the way you look at something when you have spent 12 years studying a subject and a single image has just reorganized everything you thought you understood. You chose a predator, Fess Uller said. As a mark, something permanent. Of course, Priya Voss said, and her smile was fully present now, warm and easy and carrying, beneath its surface, something ancient and absolutely unsentimental. It's a reminder. Of what? I asked. I could not stop myself. Priya Voss looked at me. Her dark eyes were very calm. That we come from the same place, she said. The meal interval ended. We returned to the negotiation suite. The amber lamp was still glowing on the table. The tiger was still on Priya Voss's arm, and something in the room had shifted, not dramatically, not in any way Dethrick Voss would have acknowledged openly, but shifted the way the air shifts before a storm, when the pressure changes, and every creature with working instincts starts paying attention without knowing exactly why. I was paying attention. Dethrick Voss resumed his presentation. He had prepared a secondary offer, a revised package, slightly more favorable, with adjusted exclusivity language that softened the wording without actually changing what it required. It was, to be direct about it, the same cage with nicer upholstery. He presented it with the confidence of a man who has never once been surprised by the outcome of a negotiation, and who therefore has no defenses for surprise when it arrives. Priya Voss listened. She did not pick up the documents. She did not make notes. She listened with her hands folded and her eyes steady and that small private smile exactly where it had been for the past 4 hours. And when Dethrick Voss finished, she said, I appreciate the revision. Before I respond, can I share something with you? Dethrick Voss said of course graciously, the way people say of course when they believe what follows will not matter. Humans, Priya Voss said, have a specific cognitive pattern that your xenopsychology files document pretty thoroughly. You'll have read about it. Loss aversion. The tendency to weigh potential losses more heavily than equivalent gains. She tilted her head slightly. What your files probably underemphasize is how that pattern interacts with another one, the one that activates when we feel cornered. No one said anything. Cornered humans, Priya Voss said pleasantly, are a specific phenomenon. I'd recommend reading the historical literature. There's quite a lot of it. Dethrick Voss smiled in the way of a man who believes he is being charmed. We have no intention of cornering anyone. No, she agreed. You have the intention of offering us an arrangement where Earth's independent diplomatic capacity is structurally constrained, where our external relationships require Confluence approval, and where the technology sharing accords are weighted toward Confluence infrastructure dependencies. She paused. That's not cornering. That's just a very comfortable corner, with good lighting. She glanced at the amber lamp. The smile deepened by a fraction. Better lighting than this room's default anyway. Fessler made a sound. It might have been a cough. It was not a cough. Dethrick Voss's secondary muscle groups, which had been relaxed since he categorized Priya Voss as charming and manageable in the first 20 minutes of their meeting, were no longer relaxed. I watched the recalibration happen in real time across his face, and I thought, there it is. There is the moment where the book's cover stops being sufficient information. What, Dethrick Voss said, with great care, would Earth propose instead? Priya Voss reached into her bag. She produced a document, not a data chip, not a projected file, a physical document, printed on actual paper, which is a human material choice that carries, I have learned, specific cultural weight. It says, this is real, this is deliberate, this is not a draft. She slid it across the table. Transit rights through Sol's outer orbital lanes, she said, which we're happy to provide. Associate membership, which we'd welcome. Technology sharing, absolutely bilateral, not weighted. The exclusivity clause removed entirely. She tapped the document. In exchange, Earth gets recognized observer status in Confluence Council sessions, independent diplomatic standing with Confluence acknowledgement, and a mutual defense notation, not a treaty, just a notation that acknowledges Earth as an entity whose stability is of interest to Confluence security. Dethrick Voss stared at the document. Then he laughed. It was not an unkind laugh. He was not, at his core, an unkind person, just an extraordinarily confident one. But it was a laugh that said, this is not how things work. This is not the direction the table tips. He said, as gently as he could manage, that the observer status alone would require full council ratification. That independent diplomatic standing was a tier typically reserved for Confluence members of standing. That the mutual defense notation, however informal, implied a level of recognized strategic significance that Earth had not yet demonstrated to the Confluence's satisfaction. Priya Voss nodded through all of this. She nodded the way someone nods when they have already heard the answer and factored it into calculations that began well before they walked into the room. I understand, she said, which is why I brought these. She produced 3 more documents. Physical paper, all of them. She laid them side by side with the quiet efficiency of someone dealing cards. That's a letter of preliminary interest from the Korath hegemony, countersigned by arbitrator Senvral. That's an open dialogue invitation from the Outer Drift Collective, specifically requesting independent Earth representation. And that's a trade interest memorandum from the Veld Coalition, timed, you'll notice, 2 days before your transit corridor vote. She looked at Dethrick Voss. The small smile had not changed, but something behind it had clarified, the way a shape clarifies when the light hits it from the right angle. Earth is not asking to be recognized as strategically significant. Earth is already strategically significant. I'm here to see whether the Confluence would like to be part of that, or whether you'd prefer to watch from the corridor. The room was very quiet. Outside, through the viewport, the stars sat in their ancient positions, indifferent. Inside, Dethrick Voss was looking at 3 documents that represented, and I understood this before he did, I think, because I had been paying attention since a woman with a tiger on her arm walked unhurried through our docking bay, the complete restructuring of his understanding of this meeting. He had believed he was here to offer something. He was only now understanding that Priya Voss had also come to offer something, and she had simply been waiting, with extraordinary patience for the correct moment to put it on the table. I thought about what she had said during the meal interval, that the tiger was a reminder that we come from the same place. I thought about what that meant, not abstractly, but specifically. This was a species that had looked at the apex predators of its own world, creatures of terrible speed and absolute commitment to survival, and had said, not an enemy, a teacher, a symbol, had chosen to carry one, permanently, in their own skin. There is a concept in Confluence xenopsychology called predator integration, which describes the rare evolutionary pattern in which a species develops alongside predators in a way that shapes not just their survival strategies, but their identity. Most species that face significant predatory pressure either avoid or eliminate the threat. Humans had done neither. They had internalized it. They had looked at the thing that could destroy them and said quietly, without drama, "I understand what you are. I know what it costs to be what you are, and I will carry that knowledge with me." It produces, our xenopsychology files note, a specific kind of psychological profile, adaptive, strategic, capable of extended patience followed by extraordinary commitment, unlikely to be deterred by discomfort, inclined, when pressed, to press back with resources that were not previously visible. Our files note this. Our files had somehow failed to make it feel real until Priya Voss laid 3 letters on a diplomatic table and smiled. Dethrick Voss called for a recess. He needed to consult with the legal team. He said this with perfect composure, and I respected him for it. It is genuinely difficult to call a recess with dignity when you are in the process of understanding that you have misread an entire situation from the first moment of contact. He managed it. He left the room. Most of the delegation left with him. Fess Uller did not leave. She sat across from Priya Voss and looked at the tiger on her arm and said, "How long have you been planning this specific conversation?" Priya Voss considered this with genuine thoughtfulness, the way she considered everything fully, without performance. "The Kurath letter took about 3 months to arrange," she said. "The Veld memorandum was faster, maybe 6 weeks. The Outer Drift invitation was actually their idea. We just formalized the timing." She paused. "The lamp I've been carrying for 2 years. You use it enough times, it becomes habit." Fesselar was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The lamp was to destabilize the lighting advantage. The lamp was because I like good lighting," Priya Voss said. Then, with the warmth that I had initially misread as softness, "And yes, also to destabilize the lighting advantage. Both things can be true." Fesselar made a sound that, in her species, indicates the kind of professional admiration that arrives with a side helping of wanting to go back and revise 12 years of research notes. I recognized it because I was making a very similar sound internally. The recess lasted 40 minutes. When Dethrick Voss returned, his posture had changed. Not in defeat, he was too experienced for collapse, and too honest, at bottom, for pride to override function. It had changed in the way of someone who has recalibrated. He sat down and he looked at Priya Voss and he said, "The observer status would require a process. It cannot be immediate." "I understand processes," she said. "The independent diplomatic standing would need to be framed carefully to satisfy council traditionalists." "I'm good at framing," she said. "The mutual defense notation," he said. And he paused, and something crossed his face that in his species indicates a species of reluctant respect, is actually, upon reflection, more in the Confluence's interest than I initially credited. Given the Veld corridor situation, that was my read as well, Priya Voss said. Dethrick Voss looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "You came here alone." "I did. You came here in civilian clothes, without credentials displayed, without a formal support delegation. I find it sets a particular tone," she said. The smile was fully warm now, and fully honest, and still carrying underneath it something that had been shaped by thousands of years of learning to survive in a world full of things that were faster and stronger and built specifically to be catastrophic. People make assumptions. Assumptions are information. Dethrick Voss was quiet. Then he said quietly, in our own language, and I do not think he meant for her to understand it, though I noted that her eyes moved very slightly in the way eyes move when something registers. He said, "We made every assumption. She let us make every one." Priya Voss reached across the table and picked up his version of the original document. She turned it over to the blank side. She produced a pen, an actual pen, a physical writing instrument, which humans still use for certain kinds of commitments, and she wrote something, and she slid it back toward him. He looked at it. It was a number, a date, and a number. "Proposed ratification timeline and a suggested first observer session," she said. "Something for your council to consider. No pressure." The smile, just a starting point. Dethrick Voss looked at the number. He looked at Priya Voss. He said finally, "You knew the vote date." "I did. From the beginning." "Yes. How?" Priya Voss tilted her head, and the tiger on her forearm caught the amber light of her lamp. And for a moment every line of it was perfectly visible. The tension in the haunches, The forward certainty of the stride, the eyes that looked at the space ahead with the complete attention of something that has been the most dangerous thing in its environment for long enough that it has forgotten what fear of the landscape feels like. She looked at Dethrick Voss with those dark, calm eyes, and she said simply, "We've been watching the confluence for a long time. We watch carefully. We're patient. A beat. It's something we learned." We concluded negotiations 6 hours later. The terms were, to summarize for the Council's records, significantly more favorable to Earth than our initial position had anticipated accommodating. The transit rights were secured. The associate membership was formalized. The observer status process was initiated. The exclusivity clause was removed. And somewhere between the docking bay and the signing of the preliminary accord, I filed an internal memo to our xenobiology and xenopsychology departments, flagging 17 specific areas where our assessments of humanity required urgent revision. I worded the memo professionally. I did not include the part where I wanted to write, in large text, at the top of every file, "They are the species that domesticated the tiger. They carry it on their skin. They smiled at you when they walked in the door. What did you think that smile was?" Priya Voss left the way she arrived, alone, unhurried, bag over one shoulder, lamp packed away, sleeves still rolled to the elbow. She paused at the docking ramp. She turned back and looked at me specifically, because I had been the one watching most carefully, and I think she appreciated being watched carefully, or at least recognized it as the appropriate response. She said, "Thank you for the hospitality, Voreth Sen. It was a genuinely good meeting." And then she smiled. That same smile, the first smile, the one I had misread from the very beginning, as gentle and soft and easy. And she walked down the ramp, and the docking bay doors closed, and she was gone. I stood there for a moment in the quiet of the bay. Then I looked at Fess Olar. She was looking at the door. "We were never negotiating from the stronger position," I said. It was not a question. "No," Fess Olar said. "We were not." I thought about the tiger. Mid-stride, mouth open, eyes forward. Chosen, permanent. Carried willingly into every room. They mocked her smile. Right up until they saw what she was carrying.